psychedelic drugs are commonly reported to trigger life-altering, mind-expanding inward journeys. But since being scheduled dangerous and illegal, any therapeutic benefits have gone largely unrecognized. Mental health treatment hasn't changed in generations, limited primarily to psychotherapy and a broad drug class called SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
So there's been no new drug in psychiatry essentially since SSRIs back in the 1980s.
These drugs have varying results, often with side effects, and can be seriously habit-forming.
Once you get on one SSRI, they've got you for life pretty much.
But this model could soon be disrupted by the acceptance of psychedelics by the medical, psychiatric, and pharmacological communities.
This is now coming at the forefront after spending 60 years in hiding.
And these tools actually have remarkable healing potential and have had for thousands of years.
LSD, psilocybin, DMT, MDMA, and other consciousness-altering compounds, once labeled dangerous and illegal drugs, are coming into the political spotlight. A recent ballot measure in Oregon authorized the legal use of psilocybin by licensed providers. Clinical trials are pressing forward in what could forever change the way we understand and treat both the mind and the body. Investors are flocking to stake their claim in this new frontier of magic molecules.
What is really driving us here is the fact that the efficacy rates here cannot be ignored. They're profound, and money will follow efficacy.
But these investors aren't just hedging their bets. They're true believers, intent on flooding psychedelic startups with the capital they need to invoke a revolution of the mind. The word psychedelic is derived from the ancient Greek word psyche, meaning soul, and dalun, meaning to reveal. It translates to mind manifesting, and the first real documented use of psychedelics can actually be traced back to that same era.
From 1600 BC to 396 AD, in the Greek culture, the foundations of Western culture, they had the longest running mystery ceremonies ever. And they were involved with the psychedelic drug potion called Kykeon, which we now, through modern scholarship, have identified as being similar to LSD.
Rick Doblin is the founder of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS.
Our top priority project is MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, and we're in phase 3 studies right now.
So Rick, how long have you been involved in this?
I started MAPS in '86.
In the upcoming scene, we will watch a young man who is having a difficult experience while under the influence of a psychedelic drug.
I really got involved in trying to devote my life to psychedelics and becoming a psychedelic therapist in 1972.
So I imagine things have changed quite a bit since then?
Oh my God, everything has changed.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
When I began, it was the depth of the backlash. In 1970, the Controlled Substances Act was passed in the United States. Psychedelics were criminalized. The research was squashed.
Extensive experimentation has failed to establish a medical use for LSD.
After Nixon, mainstream acceptance of psychedelics was impossible, and these compounds went underground, where it stayed for over a half-century, associated with counterculture and degeneracy.
Taking LSD is much the same as playing Russian roulette.
What are you doing out here? I'm floating up to the stars, Joe. You can't float out here. We're 3 stories up. No, I'm one with the universe. I'm God and Jesus, Joe.
But guys like Rick Doblin continued their research on the fringes.
And so what's changed now is the public attitudes have changed. The regulatory agencies are open to research. We just completed a $30 million capstone campaign for our MDMA PTSD phase 3 studies and for commercialization. We're in a major psychedelic renaissance right now. And now we have these new tools for neuroscience to really understand what these drugs do in the brain.
But that is not an easy question to answer.
There are a lot of drugs out there that we don't know how they work. You only have to show that a drug is safe and that it's effective. You don't have to know how a drug works. to get it approved.
I mean, asking how psychedelics work seems almost as challenging as asking what is the meaning of life.
I think if we have the answer to one, we'll have the answer to the other.
Dr. Charles Nichols is professor of pharmacology at Louisiana State University Health Sciences Center.
I primarily study serotonin neuropharmacology, a focus on psychedelic drugs.
So tell me a little bit about what we know is happening to the brain on, say, LSD or psilocybin.
What the psychedelics do is they target a selective subset of serotonin receptors. The one that produces the psychedelic effects is called the serotonin 2A receptor. A lot of positive effects are associated with activation of that receptor.
Okay, so how about a less scientific explanation?
Unscientifically, what psychedelics do in the brain, you're having several brain areas that are talking to one another that don't normally talk to one another, and you've established new connections, new pathways. There's one theory that posits that when that trip starts to wear off, the network will reset more into a normal connectivity state than, say, if somebody was depressed.
So what kind of tests in the lab do you perform to devise these theories?
We've developed 2 rat-based models where we can essentially create a depressed rat, give it a single dose of psilocybin, and the rats that were given psilocybin are now acting like normal rats. They're not depressed.
I'm curious, how do you know a rat is depressed?
Oh, it just kind of hangs out in its corner, doesn't like to do much.
But these laboratory observations don't speculate on what happens during the actual trip. And this is where the therapy really comes in.
It's not a question of whether the science permits it, but it's how we use these tools. These are powerful tools, but we still haven't quite figured out, or at least we're still working on the best way to use them.
Shlomi Raz is CEO and founder of Eleusis. He, along with other up-and-coming startups, are designing the methodology to safely and effectively practice psychedelic medicine. Much of their inspiration comes from ancient shamanic practices, such as ayahuasca ceremonies in South America, which have become increasingly popular among people seeking alternative forms of healing after traditional treatments have failed them. So Shlomi, what's the most important thing we can learn from these shamanistic practices as you design modern therapeutic applications?
That this clinical rollout be done in a way that treats the therapeutic potential and power of these drugs with respect. And I think that would be the biggest mistake, is that if in a rush to commercialization, that there is a loss of respect associated with development.
Maybe you can walk me through your vision of a psychedelic therapy session.
I think number one, this is not the job of a psychiatrist. Number two, we're not sure that you even want a psychotherapist in the room. Instead, the person that we think should be in the room is an attendant, someone where you feel safe in their presence. Are they certified, medical professionals? Not necessarily, but they bring an instant rapport and an instant comfort, and what they're comfortable with is emotionally intense situations.
With this process, the patients heal themselves, and the need for antidepressants or other long-term prescription drugs could fade away. But the potential for these compounds go far beyond mental health treatment. Multiple studies have found that regular minute doses of LSD and similar compounds have enormous anti-inflammatory effects, potentially offering alternative treatments to everything from asthma to migraine headaches.
We have some very interesting clues that there's much more therapeutic potential just beneath the surface.
All of this is not only revolutionary, but potentially disruptive to the estimated $16 billion antidepressant drug market.
When we take a look at some of these compounds and molecules, there are 70, 75, 80% efficacy rates. So that's profound, and that will disrupt big pharma.
Saad Shah leads a venture fund called Noetic, and he is what you would call a true believer.
I mean, it's definitely very personal. It's personal first and foremost because I personally have, drunk the brew. I had an experience with plant medicine, and it was profound on many levels. I saw the distinct impact that it had on folks that were suffering from cancer, individuals that were suffering from very serious treatment-resistant depression, major depressive disorders, PTSD, anxiety. I knew then and there that there was something here that was incredibly profound.
Okay, so there's certainly a motivation to keep people on drugs. And these compounds often do the opposite, which essentially means there's less money to be made. How is Big Pharma not trying to squash this movement?
If you're finding a market and a product is working, and clearly you've got underlying companies that are going to profit as a result of it, this is going to be of interest to Big Pharma. I think that they will get more and more involved, and I think it's important for them to get involved because at the end of the day, we need this medicine to go out there to the globe, and you need a distribution platform. Big Pharma has that distribution platform. They're the ones that can help get it out there.
But that optimism might be putting a little too much faith in a profit-based apparatus that has enabled severe drug dependencies, like the opioid crisis in America. For these compounds to truly scale, it's not only our minds, but our entire society that might need a rewiring.
There needs to definitely be a redefining of profit, of capitalism. Profit needs to first be measured in human capital, right? Healing those who have suffered. If we do that right, our investment in the companies will succeed.